My parents separated when I was about 14 months old. My first memories of the child sexual abuse are around about 3. He was a very unwell man who abused there were 4 children in our family. Yes, so I was the youngest of 4. We were all abused by this man. So yeah, it started from a very young age. It's based on really developing a trust with the child. In my case, because I was so little, it was like a bedtime ritual, like a routine, and however he would come into my room, this is what I remember of the sexual abuse.
Yeah.
Involved him coming into my room at night time. He would say that he was checking to see whether I was wearing underpants. And I was wearing underpants, and then he would always say, "It's dirty, and God's angry with you because you're being dirty, and I need to punish you for that." And the punishment was the sexual abuse in the shower. I know he sticks his finger up her bottom and was putting a camera in the bathroom, and Jen, the tickle foo-foo game. I suppose it's when someone tickles your vulva, and I said, yeah. And she goes, when they tickle that and then you tickle the penis. And I said, no, I don't know that game, and that's not okay.
Welcome to Colors of Birth, where we share life stories together. My name is Yamuna and I am your host. Today we are talking about very serious and heartbreaking topic, that is child sex abuse. Many stories like this stay hidden for years and years because people are afraid to speak about it. Often society stays silent, but awareness can save lives. Today, after surviving so much pain, she is working with WA Child Safety Service to help protect tiny angels. This is not just her story, it is a voice for many children who still suffer in silence. Let's listen to her journey today in Colors of Birth. Welcome to Colors of Birth.
Thank you, Yamuna. So my name's Genevieve Jones, and so I'm here talking about my professional experience in the child abuse prevention space, and also sharing my lived experience of child sexual abuse.
So can you take us back where it started?
Sure. It started from a very, very young age. A bit of context is my parents separated when I was about 14 months old, and my mother very soon after moved in with a very evil man. My first memories of the child sexual abuse are around about 3, but
When you were 3 years old?
Yes, but I would say it probably happened before that, but my memories aren't there from before, kind of nearly towards kind of 3 or 4. He was a very unwell man who abused there were 4 children in our family.
4 siblings?
Yes, so I was the youngest of 4. We were all abused by this man. However, mine was more the sexual abuse. There was a lot of other abuse going on, emotional, physical, spiritual abuse as well. He was a lot of sadistic cruelty in the house. We refer it to this house as the House of Horrors. So yeah, it started from a very young age and it continued until I was probably 17, 18, but we did live in about 36 houses before I'd left high school.
36 houses?
36 houses.
So when you said you had emotional abuse, what does it mean?
So, unfortunately, my mother was very unwell. She had a past of abuse as well, sexual abuse as well as neglect. Very critical, very neglectful, and also quite cruel emotionally. So there was a lot of neglect.
So can you explain what the person who abused you used to do emotionally to make it as
as far as the man who abused me, the offender, it was the grooming process, and I think the grooming process it's very manipulative, it's very premeditated, it's very calculating, and it's based on really developing a trust with the child. Typically, that's how the grooming process is, and they develop a trust, and it's often, buying gifts and bribes and things like that. In my case, because I was so little, and he knew I was so vulnerable, I had a mother who did not have the capacity to look after herself, let alone her 4 children, and was very absent from the house. I don't think he even needed to do that. I was so vulnerable and so terrified of him that was how he knew that I was going to be silent. And I think he knew that I didn't have a safety network. which is so crucial for a child to have. So that part of the grooming process wasn't so evident in my situation.
You are the youngest one.
Yeah.
How old your elder siblings were?
My oldest one, she's about 6 years older. Yeah, and she had a different father to me, but she was in the house and she needed to escape this house of horrors. And so she did leave that particular house to go back to be with her father. Going back to the grooming question, I think what might highlight his grooming process is by telling you the story of kind of how it happened. So it was like a bedtime ritual, like a routine, and for me felt like it was normal. However, he would come into my room, this is what I remember of the sexual abuse. Yeah. Well, there was a lot of torture that went on as well in the house to all of us, but the sexual abuse involved him coming into my room at night time. My mother worked at night, so he had access to us during the night. He would come into my room and he would say that he was checking to see whether I was wearing underpants. And I was wearing underpants, and then he would always say, "It's dirty and God's angry with you because you're being dirty and I need to punish you for that."
So he needs to punish you?
He needed to punish me. Okay. He was acting out God's will. So then most of the sexual abuse actually happened in the shower. Well, most of my memories of it, I should say. He would take me to the shower, and that's where the majority of the sexual abuse would happen. He was a very sick man. He had a speaker above the shower, and he would, I don't know how he did this, but I do remember it. He had a speaker above the shower, and he would obviously tape or something, a voice that he said was God. And
that the sound comes from the speaker, and as you are a kid, you will think that that's a sound coming from God.
Yes. So I 100% believed I was, dirty, which is what he said. You're dirty.
And he was protecting you.
Yes.
You believe that he was protecting you?
Not so much protecting me, but just carrying out what God asked him to do. But I believed that I was dirty and worthy of the punishment. And the punishment was the sexual abuse in the shower. And then there were other forms of torture that he did also in the house.
Does your siblings also experience the same torture that you experienced?
I recall a handful of incidents watching what happened to my siblings. They were all very different, and because I was the youngest and probably the most vulnerable, I would probably have had the most, but we're all definitely very impacted by it. I do remember him tying my brother up with a rope, and he had like a cross on his back, and again, I think that might have been a religious thing, I'm not sure, I only try to make sense of it now, and he was tied at the table when we were eating dinner, and I remember being worried that he couldn't breathe. So we had some really very sadistic acts that he would, for each individual child, really. And then there was a lot of violence as well, yeah.
Did you ever try to say to your mom?
Well, the interesting thing is that now I have done so much research on trauma and abuse and how it impacts the child. I realise looking back now, I repressed a lot of the trauma, which is, the body's amazing survival mechanism and all these adaptations that we do to survive the trauma. I was basically on survival mode from probably that day forward. So when it comes to actually telling someone, which is very typical of a victim survivor of child sexual abuse, it's not common that they tell. And when I eventually did tell, when the memories really started surfacing for me, was about 17. The memories came up, and I remember just saying to my mother, she had moved out of our house at that stage, and I said, why did he come into my room and check to see whether I was wearing knickers to bed, and why did he have a shower with me? And it was all coming up, and she said, he just wanted to make sure that your Fanny could breathe. I knew at that stage that this was so not okay, but it took me a long time for the memories to come up and for me to actually look back and go, wow, that was serious abuse that I endured.
So from the age of 3 to 17, you were abused.
Yeah.
Right? And you started sharing only when you were 17.
Yeah.
Were there not school education about the sexual abuse?
My childhood was very, very chaotic. It was constant crises, constant trauma. And I was really stuck in the flight, fight, freeze mode the whole time. And I was lucky in a way that I went to just one primary school. If they had been trauma informed, which is what we teach at WA Child Safety Services for teachers, to spot the signs, there probably would have been some investigation going on. There was a few times teachers, I'll be in the classroom and I'd be frozen in fear, and obviously I'd be, extremely full of cortisol and stress and anxious and in the classroom, disassociating, they call it. It kind of looks like daydreaming really, but it's like a disassociation, which is what children go into. And I remember my primary school teacher saying, "Genevieve, are you okay? It looks like you've just seen a ghost." And I now look back and go, well, unfortunately I'd seen a lot worse than a ghost. I'd seen, someone who was meant to be caring for me and providing me with a safe place with, really horrific, sadistic.
So is that something whenever your mother goes on the work, or is that something that happens every day?
It's very hard to remember at that age, and I know also from my research with how children do remember. So for me, it's more kind of like flashes of memories, and I have a lot of them of being in the shower. So I feel like it probably happened a couple times a week. And then eventually somehow they separated, and I was about 7 or 8. And then unfortunately my mum had just a stream of very violent, abusive men. So it didn't stop when we left this one particular...
The first person who got abused was from age 3 to 8.
Yeah.
The next abuse was from another person.
It was more... So it wasn't so much sexual abuse then. There would have been sexual abuse where I was exposed to my mother being very unsafe around us, which, showing a child things that are inappropriate developmentally and being exposed to sexual acts and stuff is still considered child sexual abuse. However, the abuse then was more being exposed to domestic violence, family violence, which, to be honest, Yamuna, I feel like being such a small child and watching my mum being so violently bashed was really what I felt caused a lot more long-term damage than the actual sexual abuse. I remember just being frozen in fear, feeling of helplessness, and not being able to get out, like very trapped. That has kind of followed me, and that's been really hard to heal, as well as the emotional abuse from my mother, unfortunately, because she was a very unwell lady with mental health issues, a lot of suicides in our house from siblings, my mother's partners. So it was an ongoing exposure to just ongoing, really, really frightening adversity and crises. The one that I remember most vividly was the first house I lived in, the House of Horrors, we call it. I remember I came back from kindergarten, so I was very little. And so it was just half a day. And so my older siblings were at school. So I remember her picking me up and going home, and it felt like immediately the screaming and the yelling happened. And then I remember him grabbing my mum by the hair, and we had this big table, and him grasping her by the hair and just continually, repetitively, just smashing it into the table till she was just bleeding. And I was frozen. I couldn't do anything because the survival freeze mechanism kicked in, and I thought she was going to die, and I couldn't move. Then she did get up. She did get up from the table and grabbed a loaf of bread from the freezer, it's very bizarre, and smashed it through these stained glass windows that we had. So that's my memory of that severe domestic violence, and unfortunately that was a very common scene in all our future houses, was these domestic violence. And then unfortunately my brother ended up feeling like he had to protect us. That created a very kind of volatile house.
Do you have any detailed stories that you experienced when you were a kid?
Yes, I've got a plethora. I've got so many that it's hard to pick one. But when I think about kind of what impacted me the most, it would have been the emotional abuse and being alone with all the abuse, the trauma. So the neglect, the emotional abuse. So I suppose from my mother, I was so invisible and I was so dismissed, and she was so absent in all ways. So I did not have that protective figure. And the very person whose role it is to protect and meet your needs was the very person who terrified me. So, for instance, when it comes to just feelings, like if I was having a feeling and I'll tell mum, the common response would, don't be so stupid, you're okay, you're fine. So then that became a core belief, and it was then the meaning that I made was I'm not important, I don't matter, and my feelings are wrong. So those kind of things have such a long-term impact on your self-worth, your self-esteem. And when it comes to telling someone about abuse, a part of the reason, and sometimes the reason that kids don't tell, well, there's lots of reasons, but one of them is they don't think they're going to be believed. And for me, I realised I didn't think that anyone cared or it didn't matter. It was just normal, and that was my normal bedtime routine almost. So the emotional abuse, and actually there's a study, the Child Sexual Abuse Maltreatment Study. It's the first Australian study to look at the statistics in Australia of all the different types of abuse. And one of the findings came out that emotional abuse is a lot more common than people realise, and it coexists with all the other types of abuse. And that is often the most detrimental part, is the emotional abuse, what it does to your core sense of self.
So did you ever try to chat with your siblings about what you were feeling?
Yeah, so that's such a good question, because that's the one thing that I think surprises most people. Like when I share my lived experience with professionals, or even with teenage children sometimes, is they can't believe that all this, so much trauma, so much crisis, so much sexual abuse happened, and it's so silent. And a lot of reason for that is the grooming process, because it's shaming, you feel guilt. I felt dirty. I felt like still I was dirty. I felt like I was disgusting and not worthy of love, not worthy of belonging. So these messages, when they happen as a very young child, get really imprinted into your sense of self. So we obviously were all terrified, but we didn't have the words, and we didn't have anyone to talk to, and we didn't know that it was wrong. And that's a really important thing when I do this education is, first of all, children need to know that it's wrong. I had no idea it was wrong, and how can a child tell when they don't know it's wrong? It's their normal. And it was up until I was 17, till I suppose the repressed memories started surfacing. I thought, that was happening in every household. And that's very hard, I'm sure, for someone to really comprehend if they haven't had this kind of trauma. But that is a very common feeling from people who have been abused. It was just their normal. And it was anything but normal. It was horrific and so abusive. So as far as the siblings go, look, my brother ended up dying quite young, and that was no doubt to do with all his trauma and abuse. He also, what so many people with trauma do, is use drugs to numb the pain, and he got into drugs very heavily, drinking, huge risk taker. One story I can share with you, Yamuna, is actually Mum moved out one of our houses when I was high school, probably year 9, so that's probably about 14, and she'd actually kind of moved in with one of her boyfriends. So my brother was meant to be the safe, responsible adult in the house.
For yourself?
Yeah. This house ended up being a drug house, a party house, a halfway house, no parental supervision whatsoever. And on the weekend, what I thought was normal was jumping in his friend's car, this old Kingswood, driving through the streets of Nedlands, which is a very affluent suburb, and doing something that we call death wishes. So what you do is, and we were in the back sculling bottles of Jim Beam at the age of 14, and you go through a stop sign and you yell out death wish. And I thought that's what everyone was doing on the weekend. So it was extreme neglect. We were all really lucky to be alive, actually. Unfortunately, my brother didn't make it, and one of my sisters is really not in a great place at all. Very, drugs and mental health have really destroyed her life.
Did you ever had a thought of suicidal attempts?
Suicide, this is a very common question that people ask. Like, how did you survive?
Yeah.
If you want, I can tell you how I did survive, or how I believe I probably had some protective factors. It got to the age when I was 23, Yamuna, and like I said before, I was really stuck in survival mode. And I just oscillated between fight, flight, and freeze. And it's not to say that I didn't have pockets of safety and fun times as well, because I was very close to my siblings. I did have some really beautiful friends and some families of the friends that I was able to find a lot of respite. But when I got to 23, there's a very famous trauma therapist, and he's written a book called The Body Keeps a Score. And this was evidence that it actually does, because I had my first panic attack. And I was probably always living in a very mild form of panic. Well, not even mild, actually. I was quite panicky as a child.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. But when I got to 23, I had the most horrific panic attacks, and it was almost felt for a while, it was 24 hours, 7 panic attacks. I got to the stage where I couldn't go to work because I was having massive panic attacks at work, and it was, very terrifying to be around people when you're having it. You just want to be at home in your safe place.
So how do you feel when you get a panic attack? So because we never got it, so we don't know how it feels.
Yeah, I didn't know that's what it was. That's such a good question. I didn't know what it was.
I have no idea how it works.
I thought I was dying. I thought I was going crazy, and I ended up, that's where the big turning point came. So I had panic attacks, but with the panic attacks, I had all the symptoms of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which I would have suffered from a very young age. But I didn't have the name, I couldn't label it, didn't know what it was. But now looking back, I had all the symptoms of complex PTSD. And so that was accompanied by flashbacks, and a lot of it was in that first the House of Horrors, with the different sexual acts that this man did with me and what he did to my siblings. So I had nightmares, flashbacks, and when it comes to suicide, I always kind of had this will to live, and I always have had a lot of joy as well as all this dark stuff going on. And I can't say that I ever thought about killing myself, but I do remember the panic being so much. I was just incubated in just pure terror. It was like I was reliving it. And the feelings I couldn't feel then, I was kind of feeling now. And I remember my friend had said once when she was down there, if there was a button to press to, get her out of the world, she would. And I remember thinking, I now know what she's talking about. Yeah, so it was scary to be alive, because all that panic that had been held in my body, that's stored in every cell, that's stored in your muscles and all your nervous system, it was like a volcano, and the panic just erupted, and it was terrifying, absolutely terrifying.
If you have to explain someone who don't know about the panic attack, how you feel it.
Sure. So it's very hard to encapsulate in words. So it's interesting, because in the Protective Behaviours program, we actually, one of the topics that we cover is warning signs. So we get children to identify what their warning signs, how's their body telling them that something's not right, something's unsafe. So I suppose it's that, because it's adrenaline, it's cortisol that your body releases. So for me, be the heart beating really fast, feel like something really bad's about to happen, and mine centred around going mad, losing my mind, which I think came from my mother, who was in a lot of psychiatric wards, had a lot of suicide attempts. So a fear of becoming like that, a fear that I was going to die, a fear that I'd never kind of touch reality again, kind of thing. So just, very physical, because of all the adrenaline. It's a very physical response, obviously, that your body's letting you know that something's not right. We need to flight, fight or freeze, basically. And unfortunately, my most dominant one would be freeze. And I was not far behind the flight. So I was always on the move. I moved very fast. I talked very fast. It was almost too vulnerable for me to be still. So yeah, that was the survival adaptations that kept me alive.
So usually people say that child sex abuse is because of the strangers. Do you believe in that?
No, and statistically I can say that is not true. So we know that 90% of the time a child is sexually abused, it is by someone they know, and unfortunately so often someone that they trust. So, 10% is that stranger situation. Yeah, so that's... And in the past, yes, the focus was taken off where the real risk lies, and that's with someone that their child usually has very close contact with, family, good family, friend, coaches, teachers, people in positions of trust and authority. And it was focused on the stranger danger, and I think because it rhymes, it kind of stuck as well. But I feel also why that is still such a common kind of myth. It's definitely, people are becoming more aware now that it is people you know and trust. But there's a lot of shame when it's sexual abuse within the family, that what we call intrafamilial abuse. So people would find that easy to talk about, easier to accept and understand, I guess, that it's strange and more likely to do it. And unfortunately, that's the cruelty of child sexual abuse, is that violation of trust and what it does long term to a child's mental health.
When you have abuse,
Yeah.
they will have a different character. Did you ever
Absolutely.
experience that?
I know the grooming process, usually, it's built on trust, it's built on building a special relationship. That's how they're able to do all these sexual abuse things with the children, and it's not often violent or rough, and it's someone that they admire and love. However, my memories of this man, him being quite cruel, because my nervous system and my brain has just remembered the most kind of terrifying, unsafe things that have happened, which I guess, again, is an evolutionary thing our brain does. So they're my main images of this man, of doing horrific things like bashing my mother, tying my brother up, locking my sister in the shed. All those things is what my brain has held on to. But in the most cases, I work with children, and when, say, the parents of the children are made aware of what's gone on, they often say it is the last person that you would ever have thought would have been a child sex offender.
Yeah.
And I hear that line so often. I know in the public eye, in the public eye, he lived in a very affluent suburb, in a beautiful house, he had a good job, he had lots of money. So from the outside,
he's the perfect person.
Exactly. And of course, he would have put on the public persona of, being a nice human being, but he was the opposite. Yeah.
So how did you come up outside the abuse life?
So at 23, when all the panic attacks and all the PTSD symptoms were keeping me incubated in terror for a long time, because I couldn't leave the house, I had to do something. And that was when to 23, when I first got therapy, and that was the best thing I could have done. And that's when I was able to actually start proper recovery and proper healing, which it will probably take me a lifetime to heal, and that's okay. But I'm definitely going that right direction, and I've come a long way. I've had two very, very amazing therapists, and I've been in therapy now from 23 to now nearly 50. So a long time, decades. And that is the one thing that I think is just so important, is for people to have that good support.
So did someone say you to go to the therapy, or did you yourself realize that you needed therapy, or did you?
Yes, it was me, because I was so terrified. I was housebound and I had to do something. And so it was motivated by the sheer panic to get better, to heal. So I sought my own therapy.
Yeah. After therapy, how did you connect with WHI?
Oh, okay. I got a degree in social science, and that took me a long time because of my complex PTSD. But I eventually finished that. Then I always wanted to work with children who had experienced trauma. So I started in child protection. I worked with children living in care. Then I moved to working with mental health. Then I had a friend who said he had a position for me after I had my two daughters that was part-time, and I needed a bit of a break from the heavy load of dealing with child abuse. And it was in a place called Serenity Lodge. It's a drug and alcohol rehabilitation place. So I got a role working with adults who are impacted by drug and alcohol dependence. And I got a caseload of 6 clients, and by, I think, the second week, I had 5 of those 6 clients disclose one thing to me: child sexual abuse. They had tried to tell,
but no,
they weren't believed. And now they were in a facility. Many of them had come out from prison, straight into facility. And so they had a life of, huge trauma, abuse, violence, serious mental health issues. And I thought, where is the prevention? Prevention is better than the cure. And as we know with trauma, so often there is no cure. You can recover, but it's a long, hard process. And this is when I found WA Child Safety Services. And prevention is our most powerful tool we have when it comes to preventing child sex abuse. So, yes, I will devote the rest of my life to protecting young children and empowering them with the knowledge on how to keep themselves safe.
How does this organization protect the child?
So we run this program called the Protective Behaviours Program, and we've come a long way in this field to the point where we couldn't talk about the word sexual abuse to now this Protective Behaviours Program is in the curriculum at every single school in Australia. So every single teacher should be teaching this Protective Behaviours Program. It's a lot of things. It's a personal safety program, but it specifically focuses on the prevention of child sexual abuse. So we train parents, teachers, any professionals working with children, as well as children, on a number of ways how we can keep ourselves safe from abuse. It is based on two main themes. The first theme in the Protective Behaviours Program is we all have the right to be safe and feel safe at all times. And even that, going in with a lived experience, and I think about if someone came and said that to me when I was at school, I actually didn't even know what it was to feel safe. Mm-hmm. So it's really important that we are educating children in so many different topics, such as feelings, being able to express them, who to tell, what feelings to tell. Yeah. So it's an amazing program, and it's one that I often say I really wish I'd had this in primary school or high school. It would have made a huge difference because, like I said before, children don't know what's wrong. So this program teaches what the rules are of our private parts. No one is allowed to touch our private parts. No one is allowed to look at our private parts. No one is allowed to take photos or videos of our private parts. And if they do break the rules, it's really important we tell someone on a safety network. So we identify 5 safe adults that the child can go to when someone breaks their private part rules, when someone's feeling unsafe or uncomfortable, if someone's asked them to keep a secret. We know 99%, sex offenders need to be 99% that child will keep a secret. So we talk about there are some safe secrets, which we call surprises, but some unsafe secrets, and we never ever keep unsafe secrets from our 5 safety people. The second theme is we can talk to someone about anything, no matter what it is. So we say particularly if it's something that makes you feel unsafe, even more so if it's something that's humiliating and hard to talk about. And then we say the message is these safety people will always believe you and they'll always do something to help you feel safe again. So it's there's 2 themes and then there's 10 topics. So we educate children, teach them these skills to equip them on what the body safety rules are, what to do if they're broken, who to tell. Yeah, so it's based on the grooming process, this Protective Behaviours Program. It combats the grooming process. So we know exactly how sex offenders groom. So the topics in the program are there because they then give children some empowerment of knowing that they never have to keep a secret. No one is ever allowed to touch their body if they don't want to. It's based on consent and body autonomy. And it is a very effective program just by teaching this Protective Behaviours Program to children especially, but also parents and the wider community. It reduces the likelihood of your child being sexually abused.
Do you have any data that how many % of kids get sexual abuse?
Yes, I do. So currently, according to the most recent research that we draw our statistics from, the Australian Child Male Treatment Study, it is more than 1 in 3 girls.
More than 1 in 3 girls
experience some form of sexual abuse before they're 18. Boys, 1 in 5. So we say in general 1 in 4. 1 in 4. And that is a conservative figure because we know the average time someone discloses is between 20 and 30 years, if they ever tell. So many people never tell a soul and take it to the grave. And then you find them at the rehabs and the mental health facilities and haven't actually told anyone what is usually underlying or a huge factor in what their mental health or addiction is. It is so prevalent. It's so prevalent, and for that statistic to actually exist, it has to have been disclosed to someone. It has to be disclosed and reported. So the statistics are very conservative at best.
So while working with the WA Child Safety Service, have you come across any stories of the kids having a child sexual abuse?
I have received hundreds of disclosures, Yamuna, hundreds. And it's bittersweet when I get a disclosure. Often it's the first disclosure, which means then I have to appear in court, often to give evidence if it goes that far. But the most important thing, and then I'll get back to the few stories, but the most important thing is that when a child has been able to be so courageous, and when we look at the grooming process, they're often, very, very more than likely threatened. The threats are really, really full on that children get. They'll kill your mum, they'll start raping your sister, no one's going to believe you. And children believe most things these sex offenders tell them. So, which is no surprise that now the average is, 20 to 30 years before someone will disclose, more for men, longer for men. The reason I say bittersweet, I guess, is I am able to tell them the most important things that I feel a child needs to hear, which I guess I wish I had heard, but I wasn't believed, was you are so brave for telling me. You have done the right thing. This was not your fault. Mm-hmm. And the shame and the guilt does not belong to you, because so often that is one of the most corrosive elements of child sexual abuse is that shame that is just so permeable and just very, very hard to work through. So for a child to be able to hear that can make a big difference, just that even if the perpetrator hasn't been convicted or haven't got justice from him being punished, the fact that they can hear those things, that it wasn't their fault, because so often that is part of the silence and secrecy is being shamed. So when it comes to disclosures, yes, I've had a lot. The most recent one I'll give you is I do a lot of work in schools also as a special needs educator, and I often do a lot of protective behaviours with the children. And I was sitting down with 5 girls, and I said, okay, we're going to do a helping hand network and working out who our 5 safe adults are. Anyway, we were talking about, that one of them had their auntie and their grandma, and I was talking about how often they see their auntie, how often they see their grandma, they're a good person to have on your safety network. And then the girl said, yeah, but I know that my cousin goes over there to grandma's house and does these things to my little cousin in the shower. And I said, well, can you tell me what kind of things? And he said, well, I know he sticks his finger up her bottom. And they were kind of sniggering and laughing. And I said, that's so not okay. That is against the law and that is not okay. And they were like, yeah, but it's his cousin. It's her cousin. And so I'm telling this story to kind of illuminate the fact that people do not know it's not okay. And because it was a family member, this girl thought it was okay. She then went on to tell me that at her house, this one cousin had also come over and was putting a camera, don't know whether it was a phone or what it was, in the bathroom, and they had been filmed having showers. And that was only a couple of days before they were having this discussion with me. So that's the most recent one. Another one, I've had so many, and another one I had was when, again, I was doing the Helping Hand Network. The child had already disclosed to me that it was the grandfather that was sexually abusing her, and her mother was also sexually abused by her dad, but the girl's grandfather. And when I realised that he was doing unsafe things, she told me that he played this game called the Tickle Foo Foo game. And I said, and she goes, you know, Jen, the Tickle Foo Foo game. And I said, no, can you tell me more about that? Because it's when someone, tickles your, and she's going like this and she's looking away. And I said, come on, we've learned the correct names for our private parts, because that's part of the program, is calling them the correct names, not having any shame around it. And she said, okay, the vulva. And I said, yeah. And she goes, when they tickle that and then you tickle there. And I said, come on, we know the private word. She said, the penis. And I said, no, I don't know that game, and that's not okay. And she had her grandfather on her helping hand network, which is so often the case because it is someone that they trust and consider someone important that's in their world. So I said, well, remember, we don't put unsafe people on our helping hand network. This is just for safe people. So then she scrubbed the grandfather out. So often it's when we're doing activities, and often the children don't know they're disclosing because they don't know what's wrong. So I've had a few times where I've been in the classroom reading a book, because there's lots of brilliant books on body safety that are really age appropriate, and the stories are the ones that children really remember, and they've got little rhymes or songs in them. And often I'll be reading one in the classroom, and we have a strategy called protective interruption. We don't want the child making a public disclosure. So disclosures are important and they're going to be heard, but we do it when it's in just that one-to-one space, ideally. But sometimes the child is listening to the book, and we might talk about not touching private parts, and then one boy often said, oh, but in the bath, my cousin always does this and this to my private parts, and this cousin was a lot older. So often when the children do disclose, they haven't had the opportunity to talk about any of these kind of topics before, and they don't actually know they're disclosing. Yeah, and it's sad to know that it's, 1 in 4, closer to 1 in 3 actually. And and that's why this education and empowerment for protective behaviours program is just so important for all children to be educated in it, and all teachers and professionals working with children. Yeah, because we say something really important actually, Yamuna, is we say it's not a child's responsibility to keep themselves safe.
Yeah.
It's our job as parents, caregivers. It's everyone's responsibility to keep children safe. But by delivering the protective behaviours program, we can increase their likelihood of being able to know what's wrong, to recognise it, to report it, to talk to someone about it, and that is make a profound difference in their experience.
What's the most surprising thing for them?
Often I start the workshops off with true and false.
Yeah.
So I'll do about 8 true and false statements to raise awareness about actually where the real dangers lie when it comes to child sexual abuse and the dynamics. And I think one of the biggest statistics is about, probably it's more, we used to say between 40 and 60% of all child abuse is what we call child-on-child abuse. Child on child.
Yeah.
So, and often it's because that child who is doing the abusing has actually been exposed to online material, usually pornography. But so that is the main offending groups, is child on child, and sibling abuse is the most common type of intrafamilial abuse, which again is something that most parents are aware of as well.
Do we have any law for the siblings abuse?
Well, it's definitely against the law, like all child sexual abuse, but it's just one that people often don't realise is the most common intrafamilial abuse, that the abuse that happens within the family is actually sibling abuse. Yeah, and I have had a lot of disclosures of children who have been abused by usually older siblings.
Do you think that government needs to do more about those kind of support programs?
Yes, we need more funding, obviously, and we are a charity organisation, but obviously if there was more funding for...
You can do more.
Yeah, we can do more. And I think it's I mean, this is another big topic and I'm aware of time, but it's the social media is playing a massive part in child sex abuse, and the exposure to pornography is having horrific impacts on the messages given about women's violence is generally shown in a lot of pornography, most pornography, and also themes in pornography are incest themes, really, and so it's glamorised. So unfortunately, we have often referred to it in different fields I've worked as rape training for boys. So we know that education on pornography is so crucial for children to have from a very young age. We don't use the word pornography when they're young, but we call it unsafe pictures or pictures of people with no clothes on, how they're not for children. And we need to tell someone when we see it, because it's not a matter of if they're going to see it, it's a matter of when they're going to see it.
Yes.
Even if they're...
How they're going to react.
Yes. And so to be able to tell them that this is something you come and talk to your safe adult about, because unfortunately a lot of children think that it's real life and they act out what they see. And this is one of the reasons why the statistics of child and child sexual abuse are extremely high.
What do you think is the best solution for this?
Education. It's education from a very young age. So you can start teaching body safety from birth. The earlier the better, because we know that the younger years are when the child is generally more vulnerable. And often, parents haven't even mentioned or teachers anything to do with body safety or what happens if someone breaks the rules. So these messages really we have to get out, and it's not a one-off conversation, it's an ongoing conversation. And as they hit older ages and developmental stages, the conversation changes, obviously, the way we deliver it. But what's really important to know is the Protected Behaviours program is fun, it's engaging, it's safe, there's nothing scary about it. Kids actually love it. Like if I'm doing individual one-to-one referrals with a child, they're waiting at the door, waiting for the next game, the next book. So that's the beautiful thing about Protected Behaviours. It's obviously a very sensitive, dark, heavy topic, but we can convert it into lessons with the children, sessions with the children, which are fun, engaging, and empowering. Yeah, and that's it's a real joy to teach. When I first started sharing my lived experience was a few years after I'd actually started doing this work, and I went on a deployment with WA Police, and one of the workshops I was asked to do, as well as working in the schools and out in community groups, was to do a presentation on the Protected Behaviours program in a women's refuge. So I went in there and, standard workshops. We had the PowerPoint workshops, the laptops and a few resources. And so I was setting up all the stuff. The beautiful Indigenous women there were kind of gathering around, knowing that I was doing a presentation. And I started talking about Protected Behaviours program. I really noticed that they were all kind of dispersing and leaving. And I thought, I really feel I have some important, useful, helpful education to give, to present. And so just instinctually, I decided to shut the laptop up and I said, if I'd had this program when I was in primary school, my life would have been so different. Then I started to share a little bit of my lived experience of child sexual abuse, and I suppose it's almost like a Me Too moment, where they probably thought, how does this, what's this white girl coming in, what can she teach us about any of, how would she know what it's like to feel, immense trauma and all that kind of stuff. And so that was a real connecting moment, I guess. And then I ended up staying in that refuge all day with the women, having cups of teas and bickies, and by the end of the day, every single woman in that group had disclosed child sexual abuse, and it was devastating. And I said, it is devastating, and we can't change the harm that's been done to us. We can heal with all the support we can get, but we can break that generational cycle by teaching and empowering our children with the skills and knowledge of protective behaviours.
So do you think that it's same with the Aboriginal community as well?
We know that the incidence of child sexual abuse in Aboriginal communities, I think it's about 8 times higher. Yeah, so unfortunately, marginalised groups are generally more vulnerable. Yeah, the rates are very high up in... in the remote communities I worked at, there's schools, and then I visited a lot of remote schools, and we would deliver protective behaviours, we would do parent workshops, all that kind of stuff up there. Yeah, and so really it's about training the teachers so that the children and the parents can be continually reinforcing robust protective behaviours messages.
So the support service is in school and the churches and all those places where people can access, right? But what about the people who are living on the road, like homeless people?
Yeah, that's very hard when they're facing added adversity, because it's because they're often isolated. I mean, there is a lot of very good support organisations, and I suppose we start with like Crisis Line, the Respect Helpline, and we have in our resources, in our books and stuff, all the helplines that we can access. Yeah, but it's very difficult when they're isolated. Yeah, and that is particularly a risk factor as well when there's isolation, because it's hidden and it's covered.
Yeah. What would be their last message from the WA Child Safety and the person who experienced child sex abuse?
Okay, I would say educate your children in protective behaviours program from as early as you can, and you can actually teach it from birth, but by 3 years old, many of the concepts are very, very appropriate for young children. And it's an ongoing conversation, and make sure that you are that tellable parent. Because if a child has never heard you talk about private parts or secrets or what the rules are, it's almost impossible for them to tell. So really important that we start having these conversations and keep it an ongoing conversation throughout their whole developmental kind of lifespan, really, because it's easier to teach when they're younger as well, and it's less scary. And often, you know, parents, I've had a few parents, not so much anymore actually, which is great, but would say I don't want my child learning about that. It's going to destroy their innocence. No, the exact opposite. It will empower them, and it will reduce their likelihood of becoming one of those 4 children who are sexually abused. So be brave. You know, the most confronting thing parents generally have to say is the names of the private parts. But if children aren't getting this education from their safe people at home, they will often go online, and that is not where we want them getting the information from. That can be unhealthy and toxic messages that they will learn. So we need to be that tellable parent. We need to have that connecting, trusting relationship. So that relationship is just so important, that they feel that they're not going to get in trouble. There might be consequences for perhaps things that haven't been great that they've done, but they can talk to us about anything, and we will listen, believe them, and help them feel safe.
Thank you so much
you're welcome.
for being here and taking care of all those kids.
Oh, thank you, Yamuna. Thanks
Because
for
of you, so many kids are safe now.
Oh, thank you, Yamuna. Yeah, it's very rewarding work, and thank you for bringing the awareness out.